My friends, listen carefully. Sometimes it doesn't take hours. It doesn't take days. It doesn't even take years. It takes just 60 seconds. 1 minute of courage, 1 minute of clarity, 1 minute of absolute power. And that's exactly what India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar delivered to the world. My friends, let me tell you something very important. In our world today, people often believe that power means having the biggest army, the most dangerous missiles, or the strongest economy. They think that true strength is measured in how many weapons you have or how many billions you spend on defense. But that is not the whole truth. Real power, the kind that changes history, can also come from words. Words, when spoken with confidence, when spoken with clarity, and when spoken with courage, can shake the ground more than bombs. That is exactly what Dr. S. Jaishankar showed the entire world. In just 60 seconds, he didn't fire a shot. He didn't threaten anyone. And yet the world leaders were stunned into silence because his words carried the weight of truth. Think about this for a second. For years, global politics has been dominated by a few powerful voices. They set the rules, they controlled the narrative, and they believed everyone else had to follow. But when Jaishankar spoke, he cut through all of that. He exposed the hypocrisy of those who preach equality but practice dominance. He pointed out the double standards of those who lecture others about morality, but bend the rules when it benefits them. And he did it not with anger, not with shouting, but with precision, like a master cutting stone with a single strike. That's what made it powerful. It was not just what he said, it was how he said it. Calm, sharp, unshakable. And here's the lesson. Words backed by truth are stronger than weapons backed by fear. You see, when you speak with conviction, you don't need to raise your voice. The world leans in to listen. That is exactly what happened in that moment. The so-called superpowers who thought they could corner India suddenly realized they were the ones cornered. In less than a minute, the power dynamic in the room changed. They were not in control anymore. India was. That is the strength of words. We often underestimate this in our own lives. We think to make an impact we need money, power, or connections. But sometimes, all you need is the courage to speak the truth at the right moment. Just like Jaishankar did. That's what leadership looks like. When you walk into a room, you don't need to be the loudest person. You need to be the person whose words carry weight. Now, let me tell you why this matters on a global scale. In international politics, every country is fighting for influence. They want their voice to be the loudest in the room. But not every voice is respected. Not every voice is trusted. In just 60 seconds, Jaishankar made it clear that India's voice cannot be ignored anymore. The world had no choice but to listen. And once you force the world to listen, you have already won half the battle. Because power is not just about forcing others. It's about making them recognize your strength without you even lifting a finger. Imagine the effect it had. Leaders from powerful nations sat there, realizing that the old days of giving orders to India were gone. They were forced to acknowledge India as an equal, as a nation with its own vision and its own power. That's why this moment was not just about politics. It was about respect. Respect earned not by weapons, but by words. Respect earned not by submission, but by standing tall. And my friends, here is the ultimate point. Words can change the balance of power because they change the way people think. And when you change the way people think, you change the future. In just 60 seconds, Jaishankar changed the way the world sees India. He reminded them that strength is not only in the battlefield, but also in the battlefield of ideas. That is why this moment will be remembered. That is why words are the most powerful weapon of all. The beauty of true leadership lies in the ability to turn the tables when the odds are stacked against you. And that is exactly what Jaishankar did in just 60 seconds. The West thought they had cornered India. They believed they could set the agenda, control the narrative, and force India to defend itself. They expected India to answer on their terms, play by their rules, and bend under their pressure. But what happened instead was a complete reversal. In a single minute, Jaishankar flipped the script. He took control of the stage, changed the energy in the room, and forced the so-called powers to sit back and rethink their position. That is what great leaders do. They don't wait for the game to be fair. They make the game fair by changing the rules. Now think about it. For decades, global politics has been a one-way street. Western powers dictated policies, and developing nations had to comply. But when Jaishankar spoke, he made it very clear. India is not a follower. India is not going to be lectured. And India is not going to be intimidated. Instead of defending, he went on the offensive. He challenged the hypocrisy head-on. He pointed out how those who claim to stand for democracy and fairness are often the same ones who bend international rules for their own advantage. And he did it with calm precision. That's the power of turning the tables. You don't panic, you don't back down, you stay composed, and you put the pressure back on the opponent. In that one moment, the balance of power in the conversation shifted. Suddenly, the Western leaders were the ones caught off guard. Instead of India being on the defensive, they found themselves having to explain their own actions. That is the mark of a true master of diplomacy. To win without aggression, to dominate without raising your voice, to change the entire mood of the room with just one statement. That is how history is made. This is a lesson for all of us. In life, people will try to corner you. They will try to put you in situations where you feel small, where you feel you have no options. They will expect you to bow your head and agree. But you don't have to play their game. You can turn the tables. You can use their own tactics against them. You can stand tall, stay calm, and flip the power dynamic. That's what Jaishankar did, and that's why the world was stunned. And let's be honest, this was more than just a moment in politics. This was a message that India is no longer the silent participant in the global arena. It is not here to take instructions. It is here to give direction. And when you give direction, you stop being a player. You become a leader. That's exactly what happened. In 60 seconds, India went from being questioned to being the one asking the questions. That is how you turn the tables. Look at the reaction. The same nations that thought they could corner India suddenly shifted in tone. Their confidence dropped, their certainty cracked, and their faces showed discomfort, because they realized they were not dealing with a passive nation anymore. They were dealing with a confident, rising power that would not back down. That discomfort is the first sign of change. And once the tables are turned, they never go back to the old position. This is why the moment was historic. It showed the world that diplomacy is not about who speaks the loudest, but who speaks with the greatest clarity and conviction. It showed that true power is not in following the script handed to you, but in rewriting it. Jaishankar didn't just answer questions. He rewrote the whole conversation. And in doing so, he reminded the world that India's role in global politics has fundamentally changed. So remember this, never let anyone dictate the terms of your existence. If they try to corner you, do what Jaishankar did, flip the script, turn the tables, and make them play by your rules. That is how you win, not just in politics, but in life. Confidence is the real weapon, my friends. It's not the size of your army, it's not the number of missiles you have, and it's not the money in your treasury that makes you powerful in every situation. What truly separates the winners from the losers, the leaders from the followers, is confidence. And when Jaishankar spoke in those 60 seconds, the entire world saw it. Calm, fearless, unstoppable confidence. He didn't need to shout, he didn't need to show anger, and he didn't need to force his words. His confidence did all the work. That is why the world paid attention. That is why his words hit harder than any weapon. You see, confidence like that doesn't come from bluffing. It doesn't come from pretending to be strong. It comes from building real strength over time. India has built that strength. Through years of progress, hard decisions, sacrifices, and relentless effort, India has earned the right to speak with that kind of confidence. And when Jaishankar stood there, he was not just speaking as a diplomat. He was speaking as the voice of a nation that knows its worth. That's why it mattered. The world could see it. The world could feel it. Confidence has a certain energy. When you are truly confident, people feel it even before you open your mouth. It is in the way you stand, the way you look, the way you pause, the way you let your words flow with certainty. That is exactly what happened in that moment. The superpowers expected India to explain, to justify, maybe even to apologize. But instead, they saw a leader with complete control of the situation. He was not shaken. He was not pressured. He was unshakable. That kind of composure is not just impressive, it is intimidating. Because when you face someone who cannot be rattled, you realize that you cannot control them. That is real power. Now let me tell you why this confidence is more powerful than weapons. A weapon can scare people into silence, but confidence inspires respect. A weapon can destroy buildings, but confidence can build legacies. A weapon can force obedience, but confidence can win loyalty. That's the difference. The world does not remember the loudest voices, it remembers the most confident ones. And in those 60 seconds, Jaishankar etched his presence into the memory of every leader sitting in that room. He showed them that India is not just a rising power. It is a confident power. It is a confident power. And this lesson is not only for politics, it is for life. Many people think that to win respect, they need to act tough, to force others, or to constantly prove themselves. But the truth is simpler. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to threaten to be taken seriously. You need confidence. Real, unshakable confidence that comes from preparation, from self-belief, from knowing that you have earned your place. When you carry that confidence, no one can dismiss you. Think about the message this sends to the world. For decades, India was seen as a country that had to defend itself on every global issue. But now, with confidence, the game has changed. India no longer explains itself. India asserts itself. And Jaishankar embodied that perfectly. He reminded everyone that India is not asking for a seat at the table. It already owns its seat. That kind of confidence changes the dynamics forever. Once the world sees you in that light, they cannot go back to treating you as weak or secondary. This is why confidence is the most important weapon. Because it is not temporary. It cannot be disarmed, it cannot be taken away, and it cannot be silenced. It stays with you, and it shapes how the world sees you. That is why Jaishankar's 60 seconds will be remembered as more than just words. They were a demonstration of confidence at its highest level. And when confidence meets truth, it becomes unstoppable. That is what changed global politics. In global politics, the rules of the game can shift in the blink of an eye. What seemed certain yesterday can collapse today, and what seemed impossible can suddenly become reality. That is what happened in those 60 seconds when Jaishankar spoke. The global game was changed, not gradually, not over years, but in an instant. In that short burst of words, the narrative was rewritten. The United States, Europe, China, Russia, every single player on the global stage was forced to pause and recognize that something new had just happened. India was no longer sitting quietly on the sidelines. India had stepped onto the field as a power that could not be ignored. The key to this shift was not military might or economic pressure. It was narrative. Because in today's world, wars are not just fought on battlefields. They are fought in the battlefield of perception. Whoever controls the story controls the influence. And that is exactly what Jaishankar seized in those 60 seconds. He took a narrative that had always favored the West and flipped it so powerfully that they had no choice but to sit back and listen. It was no longer about them dictating it was about India reminding the world of what it stands for, what it will not tolerate, and what it expects from others. Think about the weight of that. For decades, the so-called global order has been shaped by a handful of nations. They decided who was irresponsible and who was not, who deserved to be heard and who should stay silent. They wrapped it all in the language of democracy and freedom, but behind it was always self-interest. When Jaishankar spoke, he cracked open that facade. He exposed the double standards with precision. He showed that the moral authority they claimed was no longer unquestioned. That was the turning point. Once you puncture the illusion, the game changes forever. And this is not just about one moment in a conference hall. This is about long-term consequences. When the world sees that India can hold its ground, the calculations of every power shift. Allies start looking at India with more respect. Rivals start approaching with more caution. Neutral nations start recognizing India as a voice they cannot ignore. This is how influence spreads, not with threats, but with moments that redefine how others see you. That is why 60 seconds of clarity mattered more than 60 years of speeches. The brilliance of this change was also in its subtlety. There was no aggression, no drama, no theatrics. Just calm, precise words spoken with complete confidence. That is why it worked. Because the world expects power to be loud. But when power speaks softly and still commands attention, it is undeniable. The message was simple. India is not here to play the game others designed. India is here to design the game itself. And the moment that idea takes root, global politics shifts on its axis. For us, the lesson is clear. Life is also a game of narratives. People will try to define you, to put labels on you, to decide where you belong. If you accept their narrative, you remain in their control. But if you have the courage to flip the narrative, you take back the power. That is exactly what Jaishankar did for India. He took back the story. He showed that it is not enough to be strong. You must also be seen as strong. And once the perception changes, the reality follows. This is why that 1 minute matters so much. It was not just about India answering a question. It was about India changing the script of global politics. In 60 seconds, the global game shifted from one of dominance and lectures to one of equality and respect. And once that shift happens, there is no turning back. The world has to adjust, whether it likes it or not. That is how the future gets written, not with endless debates, but with defining moments of clarity and courage. Moments define leaders, not endless hours of speaking, not mountains of promises, but single, sharp moments that capture everything a leader stands for. Athletes are remembered for one winning shot, one unstoppable move, 1 second of brilliance. Warriors are remembered for a decisive strike that changes the course of battle. And in the same way, leaders in politics are remembered for the moments where they spoke so powerfully that history itself shifted. That is exactly what happened with Jaishankar. In 60 seconds, he left a mark on the world stage that will not fade. That 1 minute was not just a statement. It was a legacy in the making. Think about the power of that. Hundreds of leaders speak every year at conferences and summits. Most have forgotten the moment they finish. They talk, they argue, they repeat the same lines, but history does not remember them. Yet Jaishankar spoke for just a minute, and the world cannot stop talking about it. Why? Because his words carried the weight of a nation, the discipline of truth, and the fire of confidence. He didn't just speak, he delivered a knockout punch. And when you land a knockout punch, the whole world remembers. This is the mark of true leadership. Leadership is not about filling time with endless talk. It is about using time with maximum impact. In that single minute, he did what others couldn't do in hours. He shifted the balance of perception. He forced the most powerful nations to pause, to rethink, to question themselves. And that, my friends, is the essence of legacy. Legacy is not built by how long you speak, but by how deeply your words are felt. Now, let's understand why this matters on the global stage. For decades, the global order has been shaped by a few nations who believe they could lecture the rest of the world forever. But moments like these break that pattern. Moments like these become reference points in history. From now on, whenever nations try to corner India, they will remember Jaishankar's 1 minute stand. They will remember that India cannot be silenced, cannot be intimidated, cannot be treated as a subordinate. That memory becomes a shield. That memory becomes strength. That memory is the beginning of a new legacy. But this is not only about India. This is about a lesson that applies to all of us in life. Too often we think greatness comes from doing more, from speaking more, from constantly proving ourselves. But the truth is, greatness comes from seizing the moment. When your time comes, when the spotlight is on you, when the world is watching, you must deliver. You may only get one chance, 1 minute, one opportunity. And if you are ready, if you are confident, if you are fearless, that one moment can define everything, that is what Jaishankar showed the world. This is why we will talk about this moment for years. Because it is not just about words, it is about transformation. In that short span of time, the perception of India changed. India was no longer seen as a country being questioned. It was seen as a country questioning back. No longer as a follower. It was seen as a leader. That is a shift that cannot be erased. Once people see you differently, once they respect you, once they recognize your power, the legacy is locked in. And that, my friends, is the ultimate lesson of leadership. It is not about how long you hold the mic. It is about how powerfully you use the mic when it's in your hand. Jaishankar used it like a master. He turned 1 minute into a lifetime of respect. He turned one response into a global shift. And he turned one moment into a legacy that will echo in history. That is why in just 60 seconds, he didn't just speak, he changed global politics forever.